you're making any form of club-oriented dance music, then the peak of your track is likely going to be the most important point. So I've put together a little checklist of things that you should think about so we can nail this every time. If you are making this style of music, then you should definitely check out the free sample packs that we have on the EDMProd website. We have this really cool analog sample pack, a Foley sample pack. We have some serum presets that could be useful and some starter kits. So the link's in the description for that one. So the peak of your track is a really important point for a whole bunch of different reasons. If you put yourself in the shoes of a label owner listening to like 20 tracks and just scrolling through them all, this is most likely the point that they'll skip to when they're listening to your track. If you're also thinking about promotion, then the peak of the track is a really important point for, taking that little section and uploading that as a preview. If we're thinking about the club scenario, then the peak of the track is what's most often remembered, but also recorded by people at the club themselves. These recording videos that people take at clubs when the crowd's going wild or whatever, these are really important for promotion as well. So there's a lot of stuff riding on the peak of your track, and I thought I'd just express the importance of it before we begin. So our first point to remember is that if you've built tension, then you have to release it. Tension and release, they go hand in hand, and one needs to be with the other. So I'm going to show you an example of this track, and I've actually built quite a lot of tension here. And then let's talk about how I've relieved that tension or released it on the other end. So let's have a listen here. So I want to explain a few things about how this track is working first. So I've built up tension in a whole bunch of different ways, and this is kind of the gist of this track, building tension in a whole bunch of small ways rather than just like one huge snare roll, for example. But we have this sort of these sort of background elements in this transitions group here. So we've got this effects here. We also have this which is a really interesting technique, which I actually just resampled the whole track and made it a lot quieter, of course, and then sort of panned it left and right, made it really stereo and put a whole bunch of reverb on it as well. We also are taking out a bunch of core elements here. So, there's no kick in this section. And then we do a little drum fill, which is building tension and anticipation towards this drop here. There's a few like sort of crash and choppy high-end elements in here, which is building tension. But mainly what we have here is the ambience that is sort of very slowly progressing. So I think this is sort of the main builder of this anticipation here. So there's a whole bunch of different things going on. It's kind of all over the place, but I want to show you this. I want to show you if I was to simply deactivate these clips here, and let's look at maybe some other things that might be relieving tension. So what I'm doing is deactivating all of the things that are releasing the tension. I'm going to show you what this drop sounds like when there's no release of tension. So have a listen to this. How weird is that? It's such a weird thing for me to listen to. So even if I have these sort of crashes in here as well, this is the kind of effect that you get when you don't properly release your tension. And this is the first point today, because I have seen it so much when I'm giving feedback to people. It's, the track actually hasn't released the tension that you build. And if you build that tension, then it leaves your listener in a really weird place. It's like, something should have happened there, but it didn't. And I don't really know how I feel about it. And oftentimes it's as simple as like maybe a crash out or something like this. So have a listen to this just with these crash outs in here as well now. So again, it's not perfect, and like, why is this? Well, I'd bring this down to a few different types of tension being built. So we have some high-end tension here, so like the drum elements and these crashes, and this is sort of fulfilling that high-end tension, right? but it still feels a little bit off, and that's because we are building a whole bunch of like sort of mid-range tension as well, and that's like these synths here. And there's no release of that tension here without this thing that I have in here, which is just a synth that is just falling like this. So that's very much releasing tension there. And then this thing as well. Because these two things work together. So if I put them together like this. So now we'll have the release of that mid-range synth sort of tension. We also have the release of that sort of like high-end tension as well. So just to recap, if you're building tension, you should release it. Have a think about what type of tension it is, if it's high-end tension, if it's mid-range tension, and think about how you can adequately release that depending on your track. So the next important point here is that your peak needs to be recognizable. So we don't want to make it too dramatically different so that it throws off the listener, because like we talked about earlier, there's a lot riding on your peak. There's a lot of expectation being built. So I wanted to show you this track here. It's like a progressive house track made by one of the EDMProd students. It's a really, really cool track. So let's just listen to this first little drop section here. I really like the vibe of this track. He's done so well with the drums and the bassline groove and everything sort of fitting together, and the progression of the track is really nice. We do have this big sort of breakdown section here. And our peak of the track is here, right? And we have this big breakdown section here that goes into like this sort of more orchestral. Now, this is all fine to do, but there's a few important points that we have to take into consideration when doing this. So first of all, when you have quieter breakdowns, it's kind of sometimes hard to pull off in club music because clubs are really loud environments. And when you have a quieter section in your track, often you'll hear music from the next room. People will stop dancing in this section as well. And it also gives people a moment to like sort of leave the dance floor as well. This is, if someone's going to leave the dance floor, it's usually going to be in the breakdown or between tracks, right? So these are things to think about when you're doing this. You can still pull off these sections, but just have these things in mind. The more important thing that I'm wanting to talk about today is when you have a big breakdown, you're building a lot of tension, you're building a lot of anticipation as well. So that puts even more pressure on your peak here. And so this is an important thing to think about, especially in this track, because he's done something a little bit different with the peak here. Let's just have a listen here. So I totally understand what he's going for here. This is the B section. We're trying to switch things up and make things feel a little bit different. But when it comes to the peak of the track, we don't want to change things too much. And that's because we've built up all of this anticipation here. So if you don't give the adequate payoff, then it sort of throws people off in this sense. So he actually switches back to the original theme back here. So what I'm going to do here is just make a few cuts. And this is the B section, so I'm actually just going to recolor this. And I'm going to copy this and swap these sections over and paste it here. And let's just have a listen to the difference here. So we have this build up, which is building a whole bunch of anticipation for the drop. Right, and then we go into the peak. You see how now that really pays off, that anticipation that we're building. And then we can go back to the B section a little bit later on. And that changes things up, makes things feel fresh again, and then we can go back to that original theme again, and it has a really solid structure now. The peak is a really important point to not change too much. We want it to be solid and not throw off our listener. So pulling off B sections in the peak is kind of hard to do in this genre of music, particularly in this track. So the way I like to think about it is in levels of expectation. If we have a lot of expectation, which we do here, then a B section is going to be harder to pull off because it's a big change. So when we have less expectation, which is in this section, we have the opportunity to surprise the listener in a really nice way. So this is why a B section in this track works with a little bit less expectation riding on it. So this way, with this quick rearrangement in the second half, we have a really solid peak and structure that will satisfy those dance floors a little bit more. So the last thing I want to touch on today is having some element of contrast or difference to the rest of your track. So this is like the reverse of the thing that we were just talking about. We don't want to change things too much, but we also don't want to not change things at all because that'll make it too repetitive. So this is an interesting example of a track where I've only made one really quite minor change, just a little vocal shot that I've brought in. And that's the only difference between the peak of the track and all the other drops. And that's all it needs. So it can be a small difference like this, or it could be a big difference, but we need some element of change, some element of difference from the main theme of the track. So have a listen to this track, and I'm going to play maybe a section back here, and that'll show you sort of what the track's about. Maybe this section as well. So all through here, I'm building tension, and then some core elements start to drop away with the drums, and the drums start to do a little fill. And see how this one element here is just enough change to make this track feel fresh and different. So I'm going to play from maybe back here. It's a really interesting thing because it's a very minute element, but it just gives it what it needs, that extra little lift to make it feel progressing in the second half. So this feels like a really obvious thing for me to say, but this is just the last final piece of the puzzle here, that final checkbox we need to make some sort of difference in the second half of the track. Adding something like this can be good, but sometimes you need to swap things. Sometimes something needs to be changed slightly instead of added. Just some sort of change in the second half is really important, just to have that final piece of the puzzle so it actually feels like the track is evolving over time. So this last point, I don't think I need to really demonstrate it, but I just wanted to include just to tick all of those boxes of the checklist, and that is, number one, if you've built tension, then you should release it. So we don't want to forget to not release the tension because that'll make the track feel a little bit weird. And you can also think about the different types of tension, whether it be like high-end tension or mid-range tension, whatever it may be. Next point is we want things to be recognizable, so we don't want to change them too much to throw off the listener, especially when we have a big breakdown. It makes the expectation level higher, so changing it is actually a little bit harder to do. So thinking about having a nice solid payoff is a really important point here as well. And then point 3 is just making sure that it has some sort of difference to the rest of your track. So we want to find that silver lining between not changing it too much and then also not changing it at all. So if you can tick these 3 boxes, I reckon you're doing a pretty good job. I hope you've learned a few things today about how we can nail the peak of our track. If you enjoyed the video, remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, thanks for hanging out, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.